Hi guys, this is Hirosaki. This story is all about what if Itachi was interested in having a child. Petunia performs a bit of accidental magic. It says something about her parenting that Uchiha Itachi is considered a better prospect for raising a child. Young Hari is raised by one of the most infamous nukenin of all time and a cadre of uncles whose cumulative effect is very prominent. And someone had the bright idea to bring him back to England. Merlin helps them all. Before we start, kindly like and subscribe to this channel, and look over the description box for the author of this amazing storyline. Welcome aboard. Chapter 55, Gifts with Consequences. So, Hari. Pansy was using her reminding Hari of the real-world tone. I realized that I should have mentioned this earlier, but Christmas break starts today. The rest of us are going to be going home to our families. She paused and looked down a list in front of her. And all of our families have not invited you to visit. Hari had several small tools held in his mouth, while he etched something on a tiny piece of rock. I thought it might be nice to let you know that you're not welcome. And to explain why we're not going to be around for a bit. Pansy turned to the others, who were watching with a certain amount of amusement from another part of the common room. Hari walked into the great hall and frowned, walking over to the head table. Professor Headmaster? Yes? Just letting you know I'm going to be going on a short field trip. Not to worry. Lupin blinked. This was absolutely surreal. Hari opened the scroll his clones had delivered to him and began to make final preparations. 2 clones were already detailed to run their way to Argentina, because someone had a job to do, but Hari had understood from context that Christmas was supposed to be spent with friends, so he was going to do that. His clones, on the other hand, well, someone would be spending Christmas with their ancestors. A bunch of vinyl lay scattered about, and he had small piles of sulfur in one corner. He was working in one of the many scattered dungeon sections he had claimed for his purposes. His current focus was a tiny etching he was trying to complete and was having to go carefully because of the scale he was working on and the complexity of the scheme. Hey Tracy. The red-headed girl didn't even turn, let alone jump in shock. She continued eating her cereal, although she had ducked her father's spray of milk when the boy appeared in a bloom of flame. Instead, she chewed, swallowed, then spoke. Good morning, Hari. How are you? Not bad, not bad. My mom is still over the moon about those rifles you got her. Why is she asleep still? Hari focused for a moment. She looks pretty worn out. How would you know? Asked Tracy's father in suspicion. Huh. Congratulations, Tracy. About what? You're going to be a big sister. Tracy ducked under more milk. I am? I think it must be pretty recent. Hari pulled a small box from behind his back and dropped it into Tracy's stunned hands. Here you go. I have some stops to make still. Tracy watched the boy vanish in a cloud of fire and looked at her father, who was looking a little green. It was at that moment that Claire walked into the kitchen. I missed Hari, didn't I? She asked when she saw the small box her daughter still clutched. Tracy nodded silently. Claire poured herself a morning eggnog and was about to take a sip when it sailed from her hands to her husband. Her eyes narrowed. You had better have a good reason for that, she growled. There was a bloom of flame and Hari was standing beside a crib, stroller, pile of stuffed critters, diapers and bottles, and a small, jeweled pacifier with a suspiciously British coat of arms on it. He gave Claire a big smile. Congratulations. Then he was gone. Claire blinked for a moment and then collapsed in a dead faint. Tam had no practical experience with how Hari handled the celebration of Christmas, but her friends, and wasn't that a new and interesting term to use for people around her? Had taken it upon themselves to warn her of the details while on the train home. She was not exactly a Weasley, but she got the general idea, so she had promptly informed her body's kinfolk. Fred and Forge had been sad to realize that they wouldn't be pranking anyone, because Professor Potter would expect more serious traps, and they weren't keen to do that to their family. Percy was mostly indifferent. His life had become much more interesting since the introduction of Professor Potter to it, but he nevertheless was a comparatively stoic member of the Weasleys, not laid back or relaxed, merely that he was better self-possessed and controlled than others. Ron was curious, but that was because he was currently in his smart cycle, and so wished to observe Professor Potter in an unfamiliar environment. The upshot of all of this, though, was that when Harry appeared, he was surprised to find himself wrapped in a fierce hug and dragged to a table so laden with food that he expected it to collapse. It took him several stunned moments to register that someone other than his father or uncles had successfully grappled him, and so he stared into space, trying to catch up with the world. The woman burbled on and on about friends and eating. He wasn't able to fathom food at the moment, too distracted by this development, but the fat-dripping stuff piled high in front of him was unappetizing regardless. The proffered plate, also stacked with servings most gluttons considered excessive, was duly ignored while he examined what had just happened. All around him was a quiet, cheerful buzz of conversation, and a general feeling of well-being that he wasn't entirely able to ignore. A further look at the fat woman provided the knowledge that she was no fighter, had no skill in arms. Her movements were too clumsy and ill-thought for that. No economy of movement that even someone who didn't need to preserve strength adopted as he grew in skill. On the other hand, she clearly had not a single evil impulse in her aside from being a great threat to various livestock and agricultural products, and possibly to his stomach if he ate this stuff, and her complete lack of anything resembling an intent to harm or even mildly annoy was why he hadn't sensed her attack. With the matter settled in his mind, he turned to Tam. Normally, this would be the place where I give you a gift, he said. But since I am training you, I give you a reminder to practice more since success is a reward all its own. He paused. But I might also have a few new rune schemes for you to check out when you get back to school. Something unnatural prompted him to add, goodbye, to the table in general before vanishing. Tam blinked. Somehow, the involvement of HarryPotter in her first real Christmas wasn't incongruous and just felt natural. That was probably a bad thing. Pansy didn't look up from her food when her parents began to swear. It didn't seem worth checking when she knew that it had to be Harry. No one else could so instantly bring her progenitors from coldly distant upper-class to longshoreman and dockside trull. Besides, the pudding was quite nice and best eaten warm. She chose to ignore the impressive array of foul language being leveled at her friend before going silent, which she hoped was just magic rather than death, but resolved to stay her course. When she finally paid attention to the world at large, she found that her friend had silenced the two adults, and was eating a small bowl of rice that had been provided to him by an effusively polite house elf whom she knew her parents had ordered to be rude to Harry, and to poison the food, but she privately expected that to be considered flavoring at best. Hello, Harry. Pansy put on a show of at least mildly icy dislike to appease her infuriated parents who were sitting at the head of their table, glaring at someone who had once again invaded their home. Hey Pansy. He finished his food and smiled in a satisfied way. I just had the strangest experience when I was at the Weasleys' lunch table. The name of the blood traders did nothing to make her parents calm. I think I might have been hugged. Pansy blinked. You're not sure? Well, I thought that Tam's not-mom was grappling me, and that I had somehow missed her attack, but she didn't seem to mean harm even passively, and she tried to feed me, so it's possible. I see. Pansy wondered if this was what it was like being Daphne sometimes. Or Professor Snape. Anyway, I wanted to make sure you got your gift. Just like always. Yep. So, I made it for you. He held out a small box with raised buttons on the side. It has music already on it. He vanished. Pansy idly pressed the play button. NWA began to blast out at concert volume. Millie watched as her mother's attempt at an ambush resulted in her flying across the living room and through the wall, destroying the fireplace and part of a structural wall in the process. Oh good, Harry said. He was looking at his extended fist with an air of casual observation. That still works. He walked over to the hole in the wall and watched with polite interest as his friend's mother dug herself out of the rubble. He was impressed that she managed to not reveal anything despite wearing a short, tight cocktail dress. Well, to anyone without his eye. When she charged at him, he absently dodged the real attack, ignoring the feint without effort. He ended up grabbing her by the neck and slamming her face through another part of the outer wall, leaving it there while he turned to Millie. "I made this for you." She took the box with a certain amount of trepidation, and then fell backwards as her mother's flying tackle slammed through the space Harry had occupied and bore her to the ground. "Oh," said the knot giantess as she spotted the box. "What did the cutie get you this time?" Millie opened the box. "I think he's getting forgetful," she commented as she put on the brass knuckles. Sparks crackled around them. "Or maybe he's just thoughtful." Her fist struck her mother, who had been staring in fascination. When her mother skidded backwards, she looked down at her hand in, well, shock. Merlin's mutilated scrotum. Her mother snarled. "That hurt like a bitch." Then Millie's world went black. "Hello, Harry." Hermione, like Pansy, didn't look up. Her occasion for non-attention was hearing her father choking on his gin and tonic. It was early for that, but she had pointed out that Harry was probably coming by. She was enjoying her book and would wait and see how long Harry would allow her to continue reading. She was enjoying the collected works of Winston Churchill as given to her by Harry. She hadn't exactly gotten over the fact that he had stolen the texts, but was willing to forego her concerns in order to read them. The margin notes the man had made were enlightening. "Hey Hermione." Harry sat down on the armchair that her father had vacated. He was now lying on the ground, hands around his throat and turning slightly blue. "How's your vacation been?" "Interesting," she replied. She pointed a finger at her father, and the liquid expelled itself from his lungs out his nose. "I've been working on reading this book when you're not bothering me." "Your homework." "Finished on the train back." She blushed, inasmuch as could be seen behind the book. "I had been busy, so I didn't look until then." "Well, I have a gift for you." "Is it stolen?" "No. It certainly wasn't too. Ninja didn't really steal per se. Liberating goods from those unable to maintain possession was just standard business practice." Hermione didn't look up as she accepted the wrapped package. It was only an inch thick, but rather large otherwise. Without thinking about it, she cast a wandless featherweight charm to address the matter and set it beside her seat. "Thanks. Your gift is in the owl." She stopped and frowned. "Mail, anyway." "It's not inside the owl. Please don't cut open a feathery creature looking for things." She peeked around her book. "Oh, he's gone." She undid the paper and blinked. In front of her were a set of late 19th century submarine plans. "Oh no." "Hello, girl Toby." Harry stepped to the side, and there was a crash as the blonde slammed into a cabinet and knocked several glass knickknacks to the ground, where they shattered. "Good morning, Daphne." The black-haired girl was watching the scene with a certain amount of amusement as her sister attempted to get close to Harry a second time and bowled into a divan, which toppled, sending her sprawling. "Merry Christmas," offered her father from his seat at the kitchen table. He was slowly getting used to the semi-annual invasion of his home by a strange boy who would spend a short time there and, upon leaving, upset the world again. He ran a hand through his blonde hair, slicked back against his skull, and considered. "Would you care for a bit of breakfast?" He knew his wife would offer anyway if the boy stayed. He loved her dearly, but she was a bit chipper sometimes. Harry leaned out of the way of Daphne's mother as she attempted to use an arm to encircle his shoulder and guide him to the table. "We asked Daphne and she had us have the house elves make you some things you might like." She pointed to the broth with a piece of sliced, grilled beef in it. "I suppose I could have a bite to eat," Harry said after a moment. His initial assessment was that the house elves had been studying with the ones from Hogwarts, since the ramen was quite good, well, sort of. Technically it wasn't ramen because someone had forgotten to add the noodles, but it was pretty good anyway. So, how are those you've already visited? Asked Daphne. I assume we are not so unfortunate as to be the first on the list? No, technically I'm visiting Girl Toby now. I'm going to visit you next. What? I've been going in reverse alphabetical order. But her name is Astoria. Whose name is? Asked Harry, head cocked in confusion. My sister. Daphne's tone could have easily chilled a bottle of fire whiskey. Why didn't anyone tell me? Harry demanded. Girl Toby was running in circles outside, burning off energy from her early consumption of excessive candy canes. Daphne's mouth opened. Here. Harry shoved a box into Daphne's hands. I guess I'm visiting you. Bye, Daphne. Daphne looked down at the box. It had holes in it. I'm not sure if I hope he pranked me again or not, she mused. Just to be safe, she levitated the box into the middle of the living room and used magic to open it. From inside tumbled a small, spotted kitten. Daphne blinked. This is somewhat unexpected. Then the kitten mewed and then coughed, and a green cloud blew from its maw and the carpet began to gray. Oh. Kitty. Before Daphne could say anything, her sister had begun to snuggle the small fluff ball, diving right into the noxious vapors to do so. She watched in confusion as her sister failed to die. Mum? Dad? She called. I think Harry got me a Nundu. He what? Her father's voice was the same flat tone she often used when dealing with some aberration of Harry's. Yeah. And Astoria seems to be immune to it. That's not possible. And yet it seems to be happening. Daphne closed her eyes. Where's Harry? Asked Astoria, holding the kitten. Daphne said something to him, and he left, her mother replied. Astoria's one visible eye began to water, and she began to sniffle. Why would you do that? She managed. Then she looked more angry. Well, her one eye did, and Daphne was already dodging as the sobbing, screeching Astoria Greengrass began to hurl parts of the living room furniture at her sister, who made for the French doors outside where she might be able to have more room. Outtake. Hello, other Professor Headmaster. Dumbledore's hand had whipped out his wand and was pointing it at a space that was conspicuously empty of anyone. You seem jumpy. Have there been any threats against the principal recently? He finally spotted the figure of his extortionist hero sitting in the chair across from him, feet resting on his desk. Aside from the right-hand man of the Dark Lord, I'm concerned about running around trying to kill your principal? No. Dumbledore scowled. He's already been spotted inside the castle at least twice, making attempts to harm him. The elderly man blinked. Why do you have a dog with you? I call him Sprinkles. Harry smacked the dog on the nose when it whined at the name. Can you give me a description of the current threat? Yes. He was one of the most devoted of Voldemort's servants who murdered a dozen innocents to kill a close friend of his without provocation. I had meant more like how tall he is, that sort of thing. My best guess is he looks something like this. Dumbledore pulled a copy of The Prophet from his desk. He looks like Stubby Boardman? He does not look like you read the Quibbler? I like to know what's really going on, you know. Harry admired the purpling of the man's face. That's not a healthy color, other Professor Headmaster. You should see the medic. Harry snapped his fingers. Speaking of medics, has anyone been possessed here recently? No. Dumbledore's reaction was reflexive. HN. Harry looked Dumbledore over. So where is my principal now? He should be in his common room. All right. Harry rose and had turned towards the door before facing Dumbledore again. Who am I guarding again? Chapter 56, and Other Gifts of Dubious Merit. Hello, Blaze. The boy didn't even look up from his book. He was enjoying his somewhat trashy novel, and didn't see the reason to act shocked. His new stepfather, though, The man sounded like he might be having his short-awaited heart attack. Hello, Harry. Can I assume I get nothing for Christmas? Just a reminder to practice. Success is its own reward, yes. Blaise turned a page. Hello, Mrs. Blaise's mom, Harry greeted the woman who was not quite cuddling up against his side. Hello, soon-to-be-dead Blaise's stepdad. What? The man rasped. Are you married? Harry asked Cersei. Yes. Oh. All right. Harry took a quick step across the room and jabbed a finger into his chest. The man slumped over, blood beginning to leak from his facial orifices. There. That's better. Harry gave Blaise a smile. Remember to practice, or I will be put out when you get back to school. Blaise hadn't looked up from his book when the man was killed. It wasn't a terribly uncommon event in this house. Bye. See you. Harry vanished and Blaise looked up finally to see a piece of paper float to the floor. Cersei picked it up. Is this a bill? Blaise's book dropped from his hands. Pay it. What? He considered the suspicions that Tracy had confided in him. Trust me. Pay it. It says in small, used bills without sequential serial numbers. Pay it. It's a lot of money, Blaise. He's a professional, mother. Pay the damn bill. Harry appeared in the middle of a war zone. The lawn was torn up and what might well have been trenches were carved into the landscaping by magical discharges. Girl Toby was flinging garden ornaments at her sister while screaming incoherently. In fairness, Daphne was no longer dodging and was instead using magic herself to catch or deflect the projectiles, sometimes launching objects to intercept things and generally no longer just running in fright. Hey, Girl Toby. Hey, Harry. She flung a birdbath at her sister and began to levitate a bench to get a better angle. Harry. The bench clattered to the floor. I think I have a gift for you here. Harry reached into his cloak and pulled out a pair of boxes. So, I wasn't sure which ones you'd like, so I got you one of each. Astoria sniffled happily and took the proffered gifts, still clutching the Nundu. Thanks, Harry. Right. I have a few more stops to make. He vanished. Girl Toby tore open her presents. Inside were roller skates. One pair of quads and one pair of inline. A note suggested she try them and see which were better for her, and that she wouldn't have to worry about falling because of some runes in the wheels. A moment later, Astoria flew across the yard as her sister decided to toss her bodily through the hedges. If you ever try that on me again, she growled. Behind them, their parents watched with some trepidation and observed how their lawn was badly damaged by their children. This was going to be several days' work for the elves. Dumbledore looked at his pile of presents in surprise. Apparently, word had gotten around about young Professor Potter's gifts. This year, he had a vast selection of candies and sweets and nary a book in sight. No, there was one about the history of confectionery. Much better than he had been getting for decades. It was sad how many people thought what he wanted was books, and not even interesting or obscure ones either. He had 15 copies of Galbraith's Principles of Transfiguring the Human Form for Beginners. He was still trying to decide if those gifts had been intended as insults or were just sort of stupid. Perched atop his heap was a small object, not even as large as his fist, wrapped in black paper with little red clouds on it. As he watched, a few of the clouds drifted gently in the black night sky. Dangling from the bough on top was a tag with his name on it and a small card. Inside was a steel ball bearing roughly 2 inches across. Dear Professor Headmaster. Merry Christmas, although I understand you don't technically celebrate it. I was playing with runes for gifts this year, and so I decided to make you something. I hope you like it. Dumbledore went slightly pale as he considered all the dangers of runes and the concerns he had about a third year experimenting with them. On the upside, that explained why the castle kept having to draw power from the ley lines to repair itself. On the downside, that didn't help explain how Mr. Professor Potter, and now he was doing it too, managed to survive whatever caused that damage. He went back to reading. It took a lot of iterations to work out the right ratios, and there were some kinks to fix, but it works fine now. I was reading up on Lathan's texts on runic transfiguration, and I thought I would make use of them. Take a look at the runes and see for yourself once you remove the shielding on them. That only lasts for 10 seconds, so look fast. Dumbledore shrugged and sat down on a mountain of gummy bears, drawing his wand as he did. Professor Snape opened his eyes and looked at the package sitting on his bed. He didn't even bother to wonder how it got there when even the elves knew better than to mess with his things while he was using them. It meant, however, that he didn't need to check who the gift was from really, who else would do it. He unwrapped what looked rather like a dissected scuba mask and a pair of. He looked again. Unlike many half-bloods, he kept up with the Muggle world, although not because of wishing to be close to friends or family there. He was just inclined to take all avenues that could safely be used to advance his knowledge of potions. As a result, he also came across other aspects of Muggle culture and life. If he was remembering correctly, the second part of his gift appeared to be a bastardized pair of night vision goggles. Dear Professor Snape, read the card. I was experimenting with runes for Christmas gifts, and thought I should make you something. It took a bit of work to get it functional, and for a while, it was making chlorine, but it's working properly now. The mask is a potions rebreather. It uses runes to summon the correct molecules out of the air for human functioning. If it can't find them, it pulls in matter and transfigures it to the appropriate mixture. The little valve at the side controls the O2 mix, so in case of a really big explosion, you can get a little extra movement out of yourself. The goggles are just see-through danger goggles. Clouds of noxious gases that blot out the sun or other light sources won't matter. Nor, come to think of it, will just not having light in the first place. If there are potions that need complete darkness to use, these are your goggles. Have fun, and I promise that the mask doesn't make poisons anymore. Uchiha Harry. Snape looked warily at his gifts from the most frustrating student person he had ever met. He was probably going to make use of the damn things at some point, but he'd be putting that off a while. Certainly, he was going to let Professor Babbling have a look at them first. Professor Snape walked into the Great Hall and frowned. He wasn't surprised by the small crowd. For some reason, many people liked to take a break from Professor Potter, even if that was just being out of his immediate vicinity for a time, but he hadn't quite expected to find Albus Dumbledore with a giant bulge in his left cheek. Snape first served himself some food and took a few sips of lethally strong coffee before he was willing to engage in the headache-inducing task of speaking to Dumbledore, who was currently in possession of a present from Harry. Headmaster? Yes, Professor Snape? What do you have in your mouth? Jawbreaker, came the muffled reply. Saliva sprayed slightly from the elder wizard's maw. Explain. Dumbledore shrugged and pulled the object from his mouth. Professor, that's a steel ball. Yep. Dumbledore grinned broadly. And I looked at the runes that Mr. Potter engraved on it. I'm not sure how he managed to do the work so tiny, but he did. It's quite good too. It turns saliva into the chemicals that trigger the sensation of sweetness on the tongue and uses the energy generated by the transformation to power itself. That's insane. And wonderfully sweet. He wrote that he was originally planning to get me a pile of Muggle jawbreakers, but they didn't work properly, so he made this. Apparently, it also homes in on a target's lower face if launched at someone. I see. Snape went back to his food, deciding not to examine too carefully how his student had somehow managed to make something that absurdly complex already. He was terrified enough when considering the boy's achievements without having to concern himself with what experiments Harry might get up to. Professor Headmaster Dumbledore, sir? Asked a house elf. Yes, Reinke? Professor Kitty needs your help. Sirius and Remus were enjoying a quiet Christmas in Remus's rooms. The two were nursing hangovers after their binge drinking the night before. Technically speaking, the binge drinking had mostly been earlier that morning, since they had started at around 10 and not passed out until close to 5. As it was, Remus was already well on his way to recovering and Sirius was using the hangover remedy he'd mastered as a third year when he began sneaking fire whiskey into the dorms. "Well, aren't you popular?" Sirius teased as he looked at the pile of gifts for his friend. Most of the paper was pink and had hearts on it. "Are you sure you aren't robbing some cradles?" "Yes." Remus might be recovering, but right now he still had something of a blazing headache, and was not in the mood for Sirius's idea of funny. "I am not fucking underage girls." "Nor," he went on, when Sirius's mouth opened, "am I fucking any of my students." "Seems a shame," commented Sirius as he found some hair of the padfoot and took a swig. "I mean, there were 1 or 2 professors back when we were students where I wish they'd been more receptive to my hints." Asking Professor Wren to please let you be her naughty boy was not a hint, Sirius. Just be glad that she thought you were charmingly pathetic instead of reporting you. I almost wish she had. Can you imagine Professor McG's face if she had to deal with that? Sirius tossed the empty bottle behind him and burped. It'd have been worth the punishment to see her that furious. Always a masochist at heart, murmured Remus as he tried to find gifts that weren't from students. I wonder if that's why you didn't try harder to get out of that collar. Ow. He'd been hit in the back of the head with another bottle. "Hey, look." He called from under a pile of presents he hoped were just socks, and not something else soft and clothy. "Here's a pair of gifts, and one's for you." "Gimme." Sirius jumped on his friend and pawed through the mound, extracting the package with his name on it and tearing it open. Inside was a rat-shaped squeaky toy modeled on Peter Pettigrew. Remus watched with amusement as Sirius turned into Sprinkles. He had yet to let the man be Padfoot again and bite down on the toy. It screamed in blood-curdling fear and pain before trailing off in a whimpering plea for mercy. He looked at the similarly shaped package in his hands and frowned. He opened the card. In the background was a squeal of pained agony. "Dear not really Professor Lupin, I understand that you and Sprinkles might not like a certain rat, so I thought you might appreciate something to help deal with those suppressed feelings of anger. I'm told it's unhealthy to keep it bottled up inside. It wasn't that hard to get the runes properly set up. They should remain able to come up with random combinations, and I made sure to give them roughly 10,000 options to pull from. Have fun. Professor Uchiha." Remus blinked and then sighed as he heard a voice that sounded rather like Peter's scream that it was sorry and please stop biting. == How do you not? I never did tell you, did I? Dumbledore asked. Nope. Harry Potter. Dumbledore frowned at the lack of reaction. The boy who lived? Not ringing any bells, sorry. Slayer of Voldemort? Who's that? The most feared Dark Lord in recent memory. Died trying to murder an infant. You people are pathetic. Harry shook his head. This job is going to be a cakewalk. So, what's he look like? Tall, thin, has glowing red eyes. Of course, he's half dead right now, so you don't need to worry about him just yet. I meant my charge. Oh. Short, scrawny, underfed, he looks abused, really. What level of abuse are we talking? Enough that his arm didn't quite heal right after it got broken. Just as well that Madame Pomfrey had to regrow it last year. It's extra to protect him from abuse. No need for that. Dumbledore waved a hand dismissively. Harry shrugged. Oh, and he has green eyes. All right. I'll go introduce myself. Dumbledore watched in confusion as the boy dragged the dog through the wall next to the door. Chapter 57, The Gifts That Keep on Giving. You will not believe what Harry got me, snarled Daphne as she dropped into a seat in the prefect's cabin. For some reason, the prefects had been reluctant to reclaim it, so the Slytherins had done so in their stead. Tam was sitting on an armchair, wearing a sweater with AG and T emblazoned on it. Despite her glower, she seemed somewhat pleased by the garment, and was reading a book that Daphne was fairly certain was illegal to possess, and she wondered how it was that someone living with the Weasley family had managed to get her hands on it. Millie was sprawled on a couch with a pair of brass knuckles on her fist that sizzled alarmingly, sending fat, blue sparks arcing into the floor and sending up the acrid smell of ozone. Despite the bruises on her face, and the way she was holding her side with her free hand suggesting her ribs were damaged, she was grinning hugely. Seated by the fireplace, Blaise was reading a book that looked suspiciously like poetry. The cover declared it to be filled with sonnets, but given what she'd heard of boys, that could just be a front for something more mature. Regardless, she wasn't inclined to ask in case it was mature material. I probably would. Tracy held out a hand with a pair of small objects in her palm. One was a black sphere that had been set into a gold claw and put on a thin, gold chain. The other was a tiny, blue gemstone with an odd luster to it that someone had set into a silver ring made to look like it was decorated with little vines of ivy. My dad had them set, but yeah. He got me a Nundu cub. Daphne shouted. All right, Tracy replied, face curiously blank. You were right. Well, sort of. I completely believe it. But I know what you meant. Tam perked up some. You have a source of Nundu fur? She asked eagerly. When it sheds, can I have some? Please? What? Daphne asked. Oh. Sure. She didn't sound like she'd really been listening. What are those, Tracy? Very, very fancy gems. Mum says they're incredibly valuable. HarryPotter will be the fucking death of me. Pansy roared as she stomped into the compartment. Blaise, get the fuck out now before I shoot you. Blaise froze, confused. What did I do? I'm going to change into a skirt I can reach my gun in before Harry finds out I didn't wear one all break. Her hand groped at her side, trying to draw her sidearm. Now if you don't get that ass out of here, I'm busting caps in it. She blinked. And see. He's got me cursing like some goddamn Doc Ho. She managed to pull her gun. You have 5 seconds. Blaise fled. Tracy was staring in open-mouthed horror. Did I just hear you swear? Harry's fault. Pansy had her trunk open and was already pulling out a skirt. The worst part? I felt like I was fucking naked without being able to reach my gun. Language, chided Hermione as she walked in. And does anyone know why Blaise is cowering outside? Hermione, said Pansy sweetly as she found a skirt and began to dress. If you don't leave my language alone, I'm going to do to you what I motherfucking threatened to do to the punk bitch out there. Hermione blinked. So, she said as Pansy made sure she could draw her weapon and, on finding she could, relaxed a little. That just happened. Now I'm going to ask, how and why? Harry's fault, Pansy repeated. I assumed that. Could you be more specific? Pansy held up her Walkman. Harry got me this for Christmas. Thankfully, he sent some headphones a few days later. My parents have been really edgy since I started listening to it. It's funny, but it kind of fucking grew on me. Is that a Walkman? No idea. Pansy shrugged. It says, well, I can't read what it says on the side. It looks foreign. How does it work? Well, I press play. Not what I meant. Hermione closed her eyes and took a deep breath. I meant that I want to know how he got a Walkman to work while around magic. Well, his gift card said he's been experimenting with runes for gifts, Pansy offered. He did that with runes. Hermione was slightly pale. We've been studying them for less than a year. How could he? Harry. Of course. Can I come inside now? Called Blaise from the other side of the door. Pansy scowled. Yes. The somewhat pale, olive-skinned boy slipped over to a seat and tried to make himself small, in case Pansy decided she didn't want him around again. What did Harry get you anyway? asked Tracy when Hermione had settled herself in a seat. Stolen plans for a submarine. Really old plans. Weird. She held up the jewelry. He got me these. Do you think he's hitting on you? Asked Pansy as she began to clean her gun. Nah. I think he just gets me jewels because he doesn't know what else to get me. Like how he gets blaze weapons or me rare documents. Hermione offered. Or gets me muggle things and Daphne things that are. Pansy trailed off. Actually, he seems to be pretty random with your things, Daphne. I've noticed. Daphne looked at the little cameo photoglass. And it never shows him right before Christmas either. These days, it just stays blank too. Well, most of the threats to your rule are gone. Millie adjusted her brass knuckles. Otherwise, we'd have to deal with them. How did you do it? Hissed Hermione as Harry sat on the bench in the Great Hall, watching the empty seat beside Dumbledore. How did I do what? You made electricity work. Harry blinked. I think you'll find that the non-magical world has been doing that for. That's not what I mean. You got a Walkman to work. How did you do that? Well, I built that one from scratch, Harry replied. I had gotten the one I picked up from a store to work, but tapes didn't have enough capacity for songs, so I just made something new instead. You got electronics to work and decided that it wasn't good enough. Yeah. Sure, the microrunes for Thunder did a great job of powering it, but the hard part was dealing with the polarized magnetic fields. Did you know that magic creates some really interesting effects on unshielded electronics? Yes. But Faraday cages don't work. It's been tried. Oh. I didn't do that. I just reversed the polarity on a few runes and used them to cancel out the effects of background magic. You can't do that. Seals helped. Harry shrugged. But like I said, it didn't do what I wanted it to do, so I made a new device instead. A new device? Yep. It's a little wardstone with micro-engraved runes to trap specific sound wave in a field, and then create echoes of them, and release them through the amplifier seals. Pretty simple stuff, really. It's not like I was trying to create a steel ball that transforms saliva into sweets. Simple. Yeah. Do me a favor? Sure, Hermione. Harry gave her an easy smile that in a few years might be special, but mostly was just arrogant and condescending now. Have Pansy show Professor Babbling your gift to her. All right. Seriously though, how did you get electronics to work? Just dealt with the electromagnetic waves from magical presences by adding some polarizing seals. It wasn't all that complicated. I had to work out which seals wouldn't interfere with the wiring. It was a godsend when I managed to rewire a circuit board to form the seals. Harry held up an object. Want a digital watch? Hermione blinked. Then she checked the time on it. It uses some rune that deals with lay something or others to keep it synced. Just had to add another seal to do the checking. So, you have a self-correcting electronic watch? I made a calculator work too. I had a few other things I wanted to work on, but I had to deal with making gifts. Hermione just stared at him. I'm trying to work on a system to visually represent arithmetic equations in 3 dimensions. Or at least to adjust modular parts. You want to make a computer? Harry paused to think for a moment. Pretty much. But I don't need the games. But that's gonna take me a lot more time. There's a lot of parts to get working, and they have to play nice with each other. No way! Cried a redhead from the House of Lions. From across the hall, Daphne and Tracy watched as Astoria spoke to her friends in Gryffindor. The expressions on their faces were interesting. The mix of horror and disbelief was pretty much all the two needed to guess what was being discussed. The exclamation of COR. At regular intervals and one cry of Charlie says those are bloody scary. Were good hints too. The looks they had when Astoria held her hands barely apart and tried to nuzzle the air between them were amusing. Girl Toby was nodding rapidly and gesturing towards Daphne, who was suddenly no longer amused. She glowered at those observing her until they looked away, although Gred and Gred looked especially intrigued. "Do you think you'll get in trouble?" asked Tracy. "Nah. I mean, I don't think it's technically illegal to own roller skates." "What?" "I think that's what Astoria was telling them about." "You don't think it was the Nundu?" "Nah. She's much more excited by the skates." Dumbledore rose from his seat. He was wearing a Santa Claus outfit, except with an obviously fake beer belly sticking out from under the top, and the pants were about 16 sizes too large and held up by suspenders made of rubber so they bounced erratically. His hat was made to look like an Aston Martin with a tiny man leaning out of the driver's side with an even smaller gun, firing it off at imaginary enemies behind him, while the headlights occasionally flipped open to reveal machine gun barrels that sporadically rattled off barrages of dry rice into the students below. In one hand, he had an empty martini glass with an olive in it, and in his right was a blow-up doll of Pussy Galore. One side of his face was badly distended, as though a large object were being stored there. "Welcome back from another Christmas break," Dumbledore called out. He set the scantily dressed doll in the seat beside him and coughed. "Having spent your time gorging yourselves on pudding and lazing around ignoring your homework, it's no doubt a welcome change to be back to the drafty castle here in the Highlands. There are a few announcements to make before I let you trot off for a final day of misery before you can return to a regular class schedule. Firstly, I want to see Mr. Potter in my office as soon as lunch finishes. Secondly, I want to see Mr. Potter in my office as soon as lunch finishes. Thirdly, there appears to be a large, black dog missing. If anyone finds it, please let Mr. Potter know." Dumbledore plucked the olive from his glass and chewed thoughtfully. "While I have your attention, I would like to remind Miss Parkinson that misuse of her firearm will be frowned upon in terms so strong I do not think I can do them justice without profanity. I will leave the selection of words to your imagination, although Miss Parkinson seems to be exhibiting a similarly vulgar vocabulary, so maybe you already know what it is I'm looking for. You are all dismissed. Where is Mr. Potter? Outtake. What are you doing in here?" asked a voice by Harry's ear. The entire common room screamed and whirled to face the boy with the swirling red eye who they'd never seen before. "And you," the boy added, pointing to Hermione. "Why aren't you in your common room?" A pause. "Where did you get this?" he asked, suddenly beside Hermione. He was holding her wand and examining it. As the watching masses observed, the wood transfigured into a very realistic model of a penis, and was then used to repeatedly bash Hermione's forehead and face. "Remember that your wand is a penis that hit you in the face," he said. Then he snapped it. "Who the hell are you?" snarled Percy Weasley, head boy badge gleaming. Harry walked past the boy and over to a short, red-haired girl. "Hey, Tam." He looked at her for a moment. "Oh. You're not Tam." "Well, we'll fix that." "Seriously," added Oliver Wood, his wand in his hand. "Who the bloody hell are you? Why are you wearing Gryffindor colors?" Harry asked the cowering Ginny. "Or does that wait until after also?" He turned and walked back to Harry. "Come on, you. We have to get you back to your common room. I have a busy night ahead of me." "You're not going anywhere," stated Gred. Most of the Gryffindors had drawn their wands. Godric's house was not known for backing down. "Nice solidarity," Harry commented. "Terrible formation and poor choice of foe." He grabbed Harry and Hermione by the arms. That was when the spells began to fly. Chapter 58, Rated M for Mature. Or. Warning. Warning, this chapter contains major character death, almost nudity and references to sexual content. And it's only getting worse from there. Hello, Professor Headmaster. Harry was seated in an armchair in the headmaster's office, feet propped on the man's desk, and a notebook in his hand in which he was scribbling various runes. "What can I do for you?" Well, Dumbledore seemed at a bit of a loss as to how to handle this. There were few things that in any way put him off, but somehow, he just did not feel up to this discussion right now. Never mind. He would find another solution to the problem. There was just no way. He would try some other contacts. "All right, Professor Headmaster." Harry rose and walked out through a bookcase that Dumbledore was fairly certain had been solid a minute ago. What did Professor Dumbledore want? Hermione demanded when Harry sat down in the common room. "No idea. He told me not to worry about it." He motioned to Tam, and she peered over his shoulder as he began to scrawl into the markings on the wall. "That should just about do it, I think." "If you say so," Tam replied. "I have no idea what you're doing." "Altering a soul glyph." Tam was suddenly on the far side of the common room. "But I've been missing a part to finish the bridge in the gap here." "I'm not going to ask," Daphne said as she and Tracy began to move away from the corner Harry was using. "Professor Babbling?" The middle-aged woman, insofar as that could be determined with witches and wizards. She could be in her 70s, looked up from her lesson plans. "What can I do for you, Miss Parkinson?" Pansy blinked. "How do you know my name?" "You threatened a student with a weapon of some sort over food. That kind of thing gets discussed in staff meetings." Pansy had the grace to flush. "But since you're not in my class, I must ask why you are here." "Well, Hermione wanted me to show you this." Pansy held out a small box. "What is it?" "It plays music." "Music?" "Yes." Pansy pressed the play button and Public Enemy began to blast for a moment. Music. Music. We can debate the terminology you use at a later point. Where did you get that? It was a gift from Harry Potter. Who? Harry Potter. Did he say what it was? Well, sort of. I was listening when he tried to explain to Hermione. He said that he'd been planning to give me a Walkman, which I gather is a Muggle device for playing music, but he said that after getting the electronics to work that it didn't do what he wanted, so he made something else. Professor Babbling held out her hand. May I see that? Pansy handed it over with a certain reluctance. Is this an engraved? Professor Babbling began to mutter to herself as she pulled out a jeweler's loupe and began to make some notes on her lesson plan, writing over it without apparently realizing. Miss Parkinson, she said suddenly, still scribbling madly. Please be so kind as to go to your head of house and inform him that I need him and the headmaster here immediately. Pansy blinked and swallowed a bit of concern as she left the room, worried she might not get her gift back. When Professor Snape walked into the room, the first words out of his mouth were, "What did Potter do this time?" Then he coughed. "Hello, Madam Marchbanks." Dumbledore had walked in behind the potions instructor and raised an eyebrow. "At the risk of sounding rude, and not to say I don't enjoy your company, but why are you here in my castle?" "Well," said the elderly lady as she pointed at an object on Professor Babbling's desk. "Well, I got the most extraordinary flu call just now. Professor Babbling wanted me to take a look at this, and I discovered something that I was under the impression was a leftover project from last year's N.E.W.T.S. which hadn't been ready in time. Imagine my surprise to learn that it was, in fact, a gift made by a third year." Her face was strange as she watched them. "And I wonder at your lack of surprise." "Honestly, if we're talking about Potter, that seems about par for the course," said Snape. "I mean, it's not like he's here to learn the curriculum. I think he just likes to have instruction on things he hasn't been exposed to yet. And someone to ask questions when researching something highly forbidden." Madam Marchbanks, Dumbledore smiled slightly. Professor Potter was responsible for last year's record O.W.L.S. and NEWTS. I find little shocking about him. Worrying, that is a different matter. And frustrating. That one often. But I'm never really surprised anymore. That's good. Would you send for him? Hello, Madam Old Lady Person. Madam Marchbanks fainted. Welcome back to the land of the conscious, Dumbledore offered with a beaming smile and twinkling eyes. I think you have begun to enjoy the effects of Professor Potter's presence on the world. He does so like to turn up when asked for. I'm just trying to be helpful, said Harry. Yes, well, I wanted to inform you that you're being granted your NEWT in runes for this work. Can I still take my class? Harry asked. Why would you want to? Well, I have all these questions I want to ask, and there are things I don't know, and I like to be able to ask the professor for help. Dumbledore smiled kindly. Of course, you can. Oh good. But why are you giving me a NEWT for this? Harry pointed at the knot Walkman. It wasn't that impressive, really. I had to work much harder on the micro-engraving for Professor Headmaster's Jawbreaker. And it was a pain to work out how to maintain a steady rate of transfiguring saliva into triggers for sweetness. Madam Marchbanks opened her mouth and Dumbledore extracted a steel ball from a pocket and offered it to her. After a few minutes' study, she sighed. I'll go fill out the form for the mastery. Can I? Yes, you can still attend the class, Professor Potter. Dumbledore plucked the Jawbreaker back and shoved it into his mouth. Now if you'll excuse me, I have a guest arriving shortly. Bill Weasley was a bit surprised when Professor Dumbledore had sent word for him. More importantly, he'd been surprised that the goblins had agreed to let him go, but apparently the man had paid the impressive fees required to get a cursebreaker to come to Hogwarts. What he could possibly need at the most heavily warded place in the country was beyond him, but that was part of the reason he'd wanted to go. Besides, he hadn't seen his siblings since the summer, and it was somewhat lonely work, digging up old tombs. Professor Dumbledore met him at the gates and ushered him into a secret passageway that he suspected the twins would kill to learn about. He would extract some hefty payment for revealing it when he had the chance. This is a temporary passage, Dumbledore said. Just for the moment. I don't normally need to quickly smuggle people from the gates to the castle, out on the other hand. Which just left Bill wondering what he was there to do. Please see if you can help, Dumbledore said when they stood outside a room with a lion rampant on the door. I'm grasping at straws and my only remaining option is rather unfortunate. Bill pushed open the door and stopped dead. In the back of his mind, he noted his former runes professor standing against a wall, but his attention was on the woman in the middle of the room. She wasn't short exactly, just not quite tall enough to be tall, probably 5 feet and 7 inches, but somehow that just wasn't that important at the moment. Cascading from her head were waves of black hair that gleamed in the firelight. Her face was sharply featured, cheekbones high and jutting out proudly, and a nose that was a bit too small to be hawkish, but had the same hunter-bird quality. Large green eyes stared at him, somehow their apparent expressiveness smothered by something. The smattering of freckles across her nose was just the finishing touch. Of course, he didn't manage to look at her face long. Not when there was so much more to observe. For one thing, a lean, smooth neck with a thick, leather collar across it was a definite draw to the eye. It was rather plain, really, just black leather with a silver bell dangling from a thin chain. After that was what left Bill with a severe blush and a distinct trouble moving his eyes. A pair of what had to be the most perfectly formed breasts he'd ever seen were standing proudly on her torso, encased by an incredibly flattering bra. While Bill was a pureblood, he was also significantly more worldly than most as a result of a profession that involved a great deal of travel and a line of work that was generally seen as being for those slightly unhinged anyway. Because of that, he had some experience with lingerie, not perhaps as much as he might have enjoyed, but still a great deal more than his peers. What he was looking at was something special though. It was made of layers of overlapping, sheer, black lace with red and gold thread. He thought it might be metal wires acting as support forming intricate patterns that he couldn't manage to focus on because the top of the cups didn't quite cover the young woman's nipples and the Scottish winter bit deep into the castle. Even the blazing fire nearby wasn't enough to keep the twin peaks from hardening into wonderfully pale, pink buds. Bill's attempts to wrest his eyes away were unfortunately downward. He observed a wonderfully trim belly, surprisingly athletic for someone in the magical world. It was lean with a small navel and two wonderfully defined lines marking her pelvic bone curving further down. Which was where his mind started to crack. The young woman's panties were of a similar make to her bra, with layers of overlapping lace hiding things from view and threaded with gold and red. He was not used to the shape of the garment. It rode high on her hips, following the curve of her body, and dipped incredibly low, barely covering her at all with that narrow triangle of fabrics. When he managed to look further down, finally away from more alluring views, he saw a pair of high heels so tall that she was standing on the balls of her feet, which were not quite as delicate as he might have expected, proportioned for her size. They were sturdy as much as could be told through the crisscrossing black straps keeping them in place. Bill turned to face the hallway and took a deep breath, eyes closed. There was more going on here than a pretty bird. He recognized the tickle of probing at his mental defenses now that he wasn't staring at her and worked to clear his mind, bringing up active protections in his mind in addition to his usual passive ones. A blast of cold water interrupted his meditations, but had the gratifying effect of negating the other problem he'd been dealing with. Slowly turning, he wrung water out of his hair. All right, I've got a handle on the mental effects. What's the problem? Mental effects? Asked Dumbledore, mildly. Yeah. It reminds me of something I encountered on a statue of Aphrodite when we were doing a dig-in. Anyway, the point is that one of the Bulgarians with me on the dig said it was rather like Vila Allure. Fascinating. As I said, I have a handle on it. What am I here to do? Well. Dumbledore seemed at a bit of a loss. You've observed the garments? Despite their tiny size, they're somewhat hard to miss, yes. Bill flinched from the somewhat familiar death glare being leveled at him by the black-haired woman. We're having trouble removing them. At the risk of sounding silly, they look like clothes intended to be removed. The glare somehow grew more intense. All right, you have me here, so it probably is a curse, a ward, or a rune scheme that's involved. Right. When Dumbledore nodded, Bill went on. I'm not sure what's going on here, but I'm guessing that you want me to examine this and remove it. Right again, Mr. Weasley. Bill closed his eyes for a moment. Given the subject, I admit it might be difficult to keep my mind on task. It had better not be, Mr. Weasley. Bill's blood ran cold. The voice was young, and had a slightly smoky subtlety to it that he usually thought of as belonging to older women, but the accent was tinged with the Highlands and the tone was unmistakable. Professor McGonagall? == Dumbledore looked up when Professor McGonagall stormed into his office, shaking with rage. Albus. The man appeared lost in a lemon-drop haze and didn't react until she threw a book at him. His sudden reaction, dodging, was enough to prove he was amongst the attentive again. We have a problem. Oh? I was just in Gryffindor Tower. That sounds perfectly fine. It was a madhouse. Again, normality is present. I have limbs strewn about. Not attached to anyone. And Percy Weasley is dead. Someone threw him out of the tower, through a wall. He fell 7 stories to his death. Huh. And Mr. Potter has been kidnapped. He what? Dumbledore was suddenly alert. Some boy with black hair and a red eye came in and grabbed Potter and Miss Granger. Some of my lions objected and apparently he started lopping off limbs. That would be Mr. Potter's new bodyguard. Albus. I have my first years playing a jigsaw puzzling my students back together for Madame Pomfrey. She needs someone to match limbs with persons. Good, so the problem is well in hand. The head boy is dead. Who was the head boy again? Percy Weasley. That's unfortunate. But the Weasleys are remarkably easy to deal with. I'll send them some more money and they'll stop complaining. Be a good girl and go find me Mr. Potter. Chapter 59, Seriously, it's worse now. Yes, Naya. The young woman's face had a terrifying scowl on it, all the more terrifying, because it was so familiar, and that meant he'd been checking out his former head of house. Oh. Bill just stared for a moment, although now instead of lewdly, it was a sort of vacant expression of someone whose brain was trying to shut down. Eventually, that cleared. You look great. The lovely woman's eye twitched. Now that Bill was paying attention to details, there were some things that leapt out at him. It wasn't anything major, but there are sometimes little things that just grab someone by the throat and demand notice. Things like the black tail wrapped around her left thigh and the two triangular ears on the top of her head, laid flat in the massive hair. Mr. Weasley, I will thank you to stop staring, Naya. I think I'm supposed to be staring, Professor. Bill rubbed the back of his head. I'm supposed to be studying rune work, yes? Then stay focused, Naya. Bill shook his head and pulled a device rather like a pair of opera glasses from his vest. Unlike normal opera glasses, these had well over a dozen lenses on various armatures sticking out of them and waving gently in idleness as he put them on. Let's see what we have here. He didn't say anything else as he approached the stiff professor and drew a notebook and pencil from his pocket. In his line of work, it was not always easy to get a quill to work, and they had long ago discovered that pencils were easier than getting pens that could write wherever curses needed breaking. His examination was silent except for the scritch-scritch of his observations being written down. Finally, he stepped back. Some of this looks vaguely familiar, but I'm having trouble placing it. He took the glasses off and paged through his notes. I'll be damned if I understand how parts of this work. You'll be damned if you can't help, Naya. The expression on the young face of his professor was dark and yet somehow enchantingly distracting, though not literally, since the slight prodding at his mental barriers was nothing on what he normally dealt with. Where did I see some of those schemas before? He muttered. He closed his eyes and cocked his head. Suddenly he stared, wide-eyed, at the ceiling. Did you just say Naya? He asked. No. She snapped. Her face went tight and twisted before she finally spat out, Naya. Oh. Bill frowned. Because if you had, then I might have some idea of what is going on. But since you didn't. I guess I might have, Naya, McGonagall allowed. Oh. That changes things. Because this seems familiar for a reason then. One of my colleagues was helping to loot a ruined shrine somewhere near Kyoto, and while he was in Japan, he stopped off in one of the magical shops in Kyoto and purchased a prank item. Bill reached into his pockets and began to pull out various notebooks as he went on. It was designed to be used on males as a way of messing with them. It would attack the victim by replacing his clothing with itself and applying a few illusions and some compulsion charms. And the only way to get it off is to use the password. Password? Asked Professor, babbling. Yes. Each one has a password built into it to remove the garment. There are several, but the one he brought back was a cat-girl outfit. Now I know why it was familiar. Once we got it off of Johnson, I spent quite a bit of time trying to work out how the thing functioned. I have my notes in here somewhere. Bill pulled out a little, black book. Here we go. The others watched as he flipped the tiny pages and began to compare it with his scribblings on the garment in front of him. I don't like the sound of that, Naya. Well, I think I may need to re-examine you. I was trying to be less focused if I could help it. But I didn't find the part of the scheme that has the password in it, so I need to do another try. Bill turned to face the door. I don't think there is a good way to say this, Professor McGonagall. I need you to lie down on the bed and spread your legs. You what, Naya? I did not do as complete a mapping of the runes as I might have because I wasn't sure what I was looking for and was trying to reduce discomfort for both of us. I know what I need to find now, so. Professor McGonagall walked stiffly to the bed, her hips swaying alluringly. Bill was fairly certain of that, even not looking, because it was built into the prank clothes, and lay back on the bed. Get this over with, Naya. Bill turned around, donning his curse-breaker glasses again, and leaned over the magnificent chest, going over it and tracing runes with his pencil to make sure he was reading them correctly. Not here. He moved down and his ears were burning brightly as he stared at the black fabric between his professor's legs. The little mewing sound she made when he traced a rune with the eraser of his pencil was not helping. I think we may have a problem. You're damned right we do, Naya. Well, I found the part of the scheme where the password goes in the prank clothes. Good. What is it, Nay? That's just it. There's nothing there. Bill blushed. Well, I was expecting that the worst-case scenario was that someone had used a rune bridge to jump that part of the programming and I just have to find a way to safely remove it, but it's just not there. I don't think this is prank clothing. In fact. Yes, Naya? Bill closed his eyes and stood up, trying to banish the images in his head. When I was doing my research on the prank clothes, I did a great deal more looking into the matter. The prank clothes are based on a slightly less innocent type of clothing meant for, well, sex slaves. Sex slaves, Naya. The shrill scream was far too attractive for what it was. Well, yes. I mean, it's generally assumed that they're willing, but... Bill shrugged. On the other hand, even those have some sort of removal condition. He rubbed his face. I still have one more bit I can check, he offered. Do it, Naya. All right. Bill took a deep breath. Please roll over and raise your, rear. He opened his eyes and saw a green death glare that he was surprised had not actually manifested as a killing curse. There's more to the scheme there. Maybe the password is just somewhere else. The look on her face was utterly terrifying. It's your call. Tell anyone about this and your death will be slow and painful, Naya. My wrath will be like the weight of Hogwarts on your skull, William Weasley. Weasley. Naya. She rolled over and raised her ass so that Bill could, after muttering a small prayer of thanks and another of horror, once again begin to examine runes. The first thing he noticed was that unlike the pranked clothing and even the slave clothing, the back of the thong was lower than on a normal person to allow for the tail to emerge at the base of the tailbone. He traced a rune and the purring sound made him fairly certain that when this was over, his professor was going to gut him. Professor? What? Naya. There's some more that I can't see. One of us is going to have to, well, spread you a bit. Bill hoped he didn't die for that. I can help, said Dumbledore. His wand jabbed out and Bill's eyes widened in amazement as Professor McGonagall's rear was spread so he could see the fabric between her legs. Bill decided not to ask the application of the charm for fear of the answer, and instead tried to not pay attention to just how amazing his former professor's ass was. It was during that effort that he found himself staring at a small, red cloud right. He tore his eyes away from there. All right. I think I've got the whole thing mapped out now, he said as he straightened up and put away his glasses. So, I'm sure now that there is no password. All the models I found when I was doing research had that, so I think this is a custom piece. That's so much better, Naya. Well, it does mean if you can find the maker, you can probably find out how to remove it. No, Naya. I think what Professor McGonagall means is that you should take some time to study the runes and see if there is a way you can discern. Dumbledore was torn between amusement and frustration at this situation. Mostly frustration, but it was funny to see this level of chaos somehow contained in such a small area. Bill sat down cross-legged in a corner and began to pore over the book he'd filled with scribblings. I don't recognize a huge portion of the scheme, he commented as he began working to dissect the various parts. Some of this stuff isn't rune work I've ever seen. Why don't you try covering it, Minerva? Prompted Dumbledore. Don't you think I did, Naya? Professor McGonagall was glaring at the old man instead of Bill now. The clothes just vanished and appeared in my dresser, Naya. Well, a bunch of the pranked clothes models are designed for pranking people, so they generally prevent people from hiding the effects, commented Bill. You might be able to use other clothes from the line of products if that part of the array is still present. I'll check. The same line meaning similar wear? Asked Dumbledore. Yeah. That's the idea. Bill blinked and began to scramble to find something in another notebook. Though it appears that part of the array has been replaced with something nearly impossible. What are you talking about? Asked Professor Babbling. This has an intent ward built in. Like an actual intent ward. Not just anchoring the ward, the actual ward itself is in here. That's not impossible, but very, very rare, yes. Bill began to make some notes. Someone definitely saw the original costume and adapted the effects. But it's broader. Instead of needing to use other clothes from the product line, it can just be anything. So I need to dress slatternly, Naya? Demanded Professor McGonagall. No, not at all. Bill replied. I suspect that you will have to get much closer to whorish. Slatternly sounds a bit too archaic. Minerva. Dumbledore called in a warning tone. Please do not kill the messenger. Why, Naya? Because he's doing us a favor. HN. Naya. She crossed her arms. These are really uncomfortable, Naya. She muttered. I haven't had them this big in years, Naya. Her eyes bugged out and she went brilliant red. Wait. Bill took a moment to recover, but his brain was already processing what she said after filtering out the thought about his professor. You're having trouble crossing your arms? That's what I said, Naya. Could you turn around, Professor? Please? Bill rose and walked over to her as she did so. Please don't kill me, but I need to check something. He took a deep breath and then slipped his hand inside the left cup of her bra and squeezed. When he woke up, there was a throbbing on the side of his head, but he ignored it. That is impossible. That you're alive? That's because he wouldn't let me kill you, Naya. No. That's a transfiguration. Thank you for pointing that out, Mr. Weasley, she hissed. I am a master of the art, Naya. Not through runes. That can't be done. You know how hard it is to do human transfiguration? Master of the art. Naya. Well, imagine doing that without being able to control the magic. You have to preset the magic and get it to work properly. Oh. McGonagall looked a bit stunned. This is completely outside my skills. Who did this? You should send for that person. I'm out of my depth. Fine, Naya. Snapped McGonagall. Albus, go get. You called? Outtake. Albus. Snape stormed into the headmaster's office with a snarl of rage on his normally snarling face. Whatever seems to be the problem, Severus? Potter is in my house. So that's where he went. And I told him to get out and the brat you hired told me no, and I said he had to leave or I'd make him, and he told me to go ahead. Well, what? Did you make him? I tried. But he wasn't playing fair. He kept not holding still for me to hit with curses, and had a running commentary about how I didn't know what I was doing, and that was why I didn't get the defense post. Interesting. There's a mudblood in my house too. Oh? Granger. Why did it have to be that mudblood? I also got a letter from Lord Parkinson about his daughter. She woke up with your new employee in the girls' dorm. All right. Anything else, Severus? No. Aren't you going to do something about this? Maybe. In time. That reminds me, most of the 6th and 7th years in my house have vanished. Any chance they're dead? No idea. Well, I can always hope. Chapter 60, Seriously Risque. Professor McGonagall whirled with appreciable speed and lashed out with a spell at the source of the voice. There was a crashing sound as Harry slammed into a nearby wall. Professors Dumbledore and McGonagall stared with open mouths. "You hit him." Bill thought that Dumbledore sounded a little too impressed by this, even if the kid had shown up without warning. "No, I didn't," replied Professor McGonagall. "I cast a cutting curse." "Naya. You cast a cutting curse on someone young enough to be one of your students?" demanded Bill. "Technically he is one of her students," Dumbledore explained. "But he's also almost certainly the cause of the current problem. Almost my tail-bearing ass, you old coot, Naya." There was a note. He signed it, Naya. She turned to the wall with rubble strewn about it. "Get out here so I can hex you." Harry slowly and rather gingerly extracted himself from a pile of masonry. The curse that flew at him splashed against the wall as he crashed into a wall on the other side of the room. "I feel like this is a place where people say ow," came his voice from the depths of a new mess of stonework. "But it doesn't hurt. It's just annoying." His head appeared again. McGonagall raised her wand and paused. "Mr. Potter, Naya." "Yes?" She stared at his face, half of which had what could be best described as a writhing, tribal-style tattoo crawling on it. As she watched, it began to spread across to the other side as well. "What is this, Naya?" She pointed at herself. "Your gift." "Why?" When Harry's mouth opened, Bill raised a hand. "Not to interrupt here, but perhaps we could focus on the problem at hand?" "Which is?" Harry's head cocked to the side. "How to get it off her." "You don't?" "What do you mean by that?" "I fixed it." Bill coughed. "Fixed it?" "Well, I was going to get Professor Kitty the one off the rack in the store." "You went to Japan to get your professor a gift?" "Of course not. I had this on hand already." Bill decided not to ask why someone who looked like he was the same age as his youngest brother would have one of those and motioned for him to continue. But it didn't work properly. Someone had been forced to use a password matrix to bridge a gap in their work, so I made some adjustments so it would work properly. "That's all?" "Well, no. It really was pretty amateurish work, so I built a new one from scratch that functioned properly." "Do you know that someone was using illusion runes instead of actually making physical changes?" Harry shook his head in disappointment at the faulty craftsmanship. "And they'd left out the attraction effect from the original model. So, I put that back in too. They even wanted to try and sell more of their clothes, but since I was building a new one, I thought it would be best to rewrite the runes so that it didn't require specific merchandise. I don't know why they didn't do it themselves. It was the work of an afternoon." Bill's mouth was gaping at the casual way the boy just stated that he had created a complex and mostly original work in the space of a few hours, not to mention had broken several well-established laws of how magic worked. All right, technically he hadn't actually broken any rules, but there were principles that everyone followed because it was too hard or dangerous not to, and he'd fucked those right up the ass. "Well then," snarled McGonagall. "I'll cut it off, Naya." "That might not work out well," said Harry in a tone more severe than any of the three professors present had ever heard him use. "I was working on soulbound rune networks at the time, so I thought it would be a good place to put what I'd learned to use." "You what?" demanded Bill. "So, the outfit is now bonded to your magic. I don't know what effect it would have if you cut it, but it's probably not good." "So?" McGonagall's voice was icy. "You stuck me in the getup, bound it to my soul, and it was an experiment, Naya?" "Of course not. I learned how to do it studying this." Harry pointed to a spot on his neck that was the center of his moving tattoo. Bill raised a hand. Can I take a look at that?" Harry shrugged. "Go ahead." The staff members watched Bill pull out his glasses and stare at Harry's neck for several minutes. "This is insane." "Well, the overlapping runes were tricky to understand, sure. Harry was holding still so Bill could examine the curse mark. But it's really quite elegant once you fix all the gaps the creator left in it. And I had to rework the section that was meant to contain a soul because I wasn't going to attach a soul to mine. I see. Bill put his glasses away. Yeah, this is way out of my league. I don't think I've encountered overlapping runes more than twice and never like this. How many layers are there in it? At least a dozen. I didn't have a lot of trouble seeing them, so I couldn't really count them properly. So, I can't get this off of me, demanded Professor McGonagall. It's not supposed to come off, explained Harry. Actually, it is, Bill said. It's a prank outfit that's supposed to be removed eventually. That's why it had a password. Harry blinked. Oh. Oops. His voice was absolutely toneless. That's all you have to say for yourself, Naya? No. I also want to say, is there anything else you need? Only to confirm that Sprinkles is with Professor Lupin. Yes, he's visiting with not Professor Werewolf. Right. Go away. There was a crash and there was a hole in the window. You know, he's normally better about that kind of thing. Albus? Hissed McGonagall. What are you going to do, Naya? There was a further crash somewhere on the grounds. Bill looked out the window to see the cloaked figure pulling itself from a crater on the shore of the Black Lake, dust itself off, and unsteadily jog up to the castle. I'm going to see about getting you something to wear. Joy. Naya. Sirius was sitting on Remus's couch, idly squeezing his new toy and enjoying the screams of anguish and pleas for mercy, while his remaining best friend tried to get a bit of work done. The knock at the door sent Sirius whirling into Sprinkles' form, while Lupin glowered at the further interruption. He was, to his great concern, becoming used to the sounds of Peter's misery. Remus, it's Professor Dumbledore. Flash, replied the werewolf. Thunder. Can I come in? It had been Dumbledore's idea to make use of an old call and response. It was simple and would keep out casual infiltrators without much effort. Having a not quite wanted mass murderer in his rooms had engendered a certain degree of paranoia. Yes. Just trying to do some grading. I will endeavor not to take up more of your time than necessary, Dumbledore said as he entered the room. But, you see, I have need of our comrade's expertise. Sirius shifted back once the door was closed and had a puzzled expression on his face. I need you to design an outfit for someone. Oh? Someone of the female persuasion. It will need to be, somewhat lewd. Sirius suddenly had a roguish grin. See, Moony? I told you he wasn't gay. Pay up. Dumbledore chuckled a little. This is not for me or mine. And you'd best not pay up, Remus. Sirius's grin was now much broader. He held out his hand and Moony placed a galleon in his palm. You're a bastard, Sprinkles. My mother was married to her cousin when she had me. At the blank look. That would be my dad. Oh. So, Professor, what is it that I can do for you? I need an outfit that would be for. I'm blanking on the term. A teacher who is uncommonly attractive? Sexy teacher? Prompted Sirius. Yes. That. Sure. The woman in question, what are her measurements? You don't need to know that. It will be immaterial. Sirius grinned again. I sort of do. I mean, I need a general idea of her figure, at least. He conjured a few small mannequins and pointed. You see the differences? Dumbledore pointed to a figure and Sirius nodded. A wave of his hand had the figure replicated several times, and another clothed them in various outfits. You're quite good at that, Remus noted. Been dressing up dolls for your fun time much, Sprinkles? Blow me, Moony. So, it's true what they say about prison? These will do, thank you, Dumbledore said, taking the conjured dolls, and ignoring the fistfight breaking out in a professor's quarters the day before classes resumed. Sirius. The man in question fell off the couch he'd been dozing on and glared up at Mooney. What the hell do you want, you mangy asshole? You have to come to lunch. I mean it. Get transformed. You have to see this. Grumbling, Sirius transformed into Sprinkles and padded out with his friend. Sirius had to be dragged back to Professor Lupin's quarters after the meal, since he was still in a daze. He transformed back into himself and lay back on the couch. Wow. Sirius. Just wow. Sirius. She was a perfect knockout, Mooney. Damn. Dunno why she was sitting with Professor Dumbledore, but still. That was an outfit I designed for him she was wearing. Think I could go into business? Sirius. If she'd model for me, I'd make a fortune. And if she modeled for me in private, well, that'd be even better. You know what I mean, Mooney? Mooney? Sprinkles. What? I've been waiting to tell you this. Mooney, I'm in my happy place right now, so get it out of your system. That was Professor McGonagall. Sirius went silent. Finally, he spoke. Don't do this to me, man, that was not Professor McG. Don't you fuck with my boner by saying stuff like that. No, really. I was at the staff meeting when it was explained to us. But did you see the size of? Yes, I did. Holy shit, man. What? I was wrong about her name all these years. I'm going to regret asking, why? It's Professor McGs. I only hope to the gods that she can't read minds, because if she finds that in my head, I intend to make sure you die with me. What a way to go, man. Killed by a babe like that. It's because of some outfit prank thing that someone got her. Sirius froze. Oh. What did you do? Sirius held up the outfit he'd had stuffed away in his special shack and grinned at his godson. You see this thing? It makes catgirls. What's a catgirl? Professor McGonagall. Oh. Harry had a pensive look on his face. Nothing, Mooney. I swear. You gave someone the idea for it, didn't you? Lupin had his face in his hands and was shaking his head at the same time. Of course not, Sirius had sounding indignant down to an art form of sorts. She's going to kill the hell out of you if she finds out, Lupin declared. You think? She's pretty livid, Sirius. Lupin looked up at his friend. She actually asked your godson for a blade. I don't think I've ever been as disturbed, not counting when I found out that I was getting up to Professor McGonagall, as when he pulled out a small arsenal from that cloak and started giving her an explanation of the merits of the different shapes and lengths. What did she pick? I got the hell out of there. There were too many things wrong with that experience, Sirius. Never mind that I rather enjoyed a pretty bird considering blades that's just being a werewolf. But getting turned on by Professor McGonagall doing that? No thank you. Plus, if she finds out that I know where you are and I didn't tell her about your part in this, she'll use whatever new blade she got to dismember me. Just be glad your godson somehow didn't tell her you're responsible for her predicament. He wouldn't do that, he's James's kid. Sirius. You saw him gut people. Do you really think he'd care about throwing you under the thestral? Maybe Azkaban be willing to take me back? Outtake equals. Hermione opened her eyes to see a swirling red gleam in the darkness. She'd been having enough trouble with settling into the newly vacated room that had been assigned to her. The nameplate on the outside had been obliterated by chipping, and a crudely worked carving of her name was in its place. The room had also come fully furnished, including a collection of sixth-year books that had been nice at least. Her scream was cut off by a hand over her mouth. Time to get your training back up to PAR. Then something grabbed her hand and dragged her down the stairs to an empty common room. Sit. Hermione had just gotten up to go back to bed when Daphne Greengrass and a young, black-haired girl were hauled down the stairs and placed in seats. Stay. Moments later, a harassed-looking Harry Potter and a sleep-tousled Blaise Zabini were towed into places. Hermione felt it was truly unfair that the boys looked more at home with this. Harry seemed as though he was more upset than tired, and Blaise was somehow in the disheveled state that was handsome instead of messy. None of you will be needing these. Harry held up their wands. That's it for this reading. Hit like and subscribe for a free ticket pass going to the different worlds of anime fanfictions. Looking forward to having you on board again.